The headline here is Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the United States, has resigned, essentially fired by President Trump today. On the phone, we have NBC News legal analyst Chuck Rosenberg. Chuck, walk us through what could happen now vis-a-vis the Russia investigation based on what has just happened.
Sure, Lester. Thanks for having me. Let me tell you what I hope, and let me tell you what I fear. I hope that Matt Whitaker, who served as the United States Attorney at the same time that I did, will take this obligation seriously, and that he will do what Rod Rosenstein did in overseeing the Mueller investigation and ensure that it's protected and it moves forward as it should. That's what I hope. Here's what I fear. I can't imagine that the president would have randomly picked someone to oversee that important function without knowing that person, that Matt Whitaker, saw the investigation the way the president sees the investigation. We have some evidence for that. Whitaker previously wrote, I think in 2017, in a piece for CNN, that an investigation of the president's finances would be a red line. That's a remarkable thing for someone to say and then take the helm of this investigation.
Does the president have to tread carefully here? Does he risk obstruction of justice depending on what moves he makes going forward here?
Well, that's a great question. I think the answer is yes. He has to tread carefully politically. The House is now in different hands. And he has to tread carefully legally. Because as you point out with your question, Lester, anything that is an endeavor to obstruct, impede, or impair a federal investigation, if done intentionally, could constitute an obstruction of justice, whether it's firing Jim Comey or asking Comey to go easy on Mike Flynn, or any of those other things we already know about. If the firing of Sessions and the appointment of Whitaker is for that same purpose and done with the same intent, it could, in theory, constitute an obstruction of justice.
The president clearly saw it as an act of disloyalty when Sessions stepped down, when he recused himself from the Russia investigation. In your view, was that an easy call for Sessions to make? Did he have any other choice but to recuse himself?
It was as easy a call as I could imagine. And here's why, Lester. Sessions clearly had a conflict in overseeing that investigation. It was as plain as day. And anybody who follows these things and understands the ethics rules that bind prosecutors knew that Sessions did what he had to do. The president may not have liked it. In fact, Sessions may not have liked it. But the recusal was an easy call, and Sessions did the right thing.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.